Hi everybody, this is Dr. Nadia Fouladian and we're going to have the first video of the female reproductive system. We already talked about the male reproductive system in the previous videos. Now we're going to continue with the female reproductive system. As we had this first general part for the reproductive system, the same is between the male and the female. We talked about the general purpose of having the reproductive system that is reproducing another human being to keep the species. And then the reproductive system produces, stores, and nourishes and transfers gametes. That we said that the gametes are the sex organs. And in the male, as we discussed, the gametes are sperm, and in the female, they are oocytes that we're going to talk about all. And the joining of the sperm and the oocyte is called fertilization, and the result of that is forming a zygote that we discussed that the sperm and oocyte, each one has 23 chromosomes, and the zygote, when it forms, has the 46 chromosomes. Now, regarding the part of the reproductive system, we said that we have gonads. Those are the organs that are producing gametes, and also some hormones that we have testes in the male, we discussed them, and we have ovaries in the female that we're going to discuss. We have the reproductive tract, that the ducts that receive, stores, and transport the gametes. We talked about them in the male, and we're going to talk about them in female. Accessory glands that they secrete some fluids, and external genitalia that are located in the perineal area. So that was the general part that you already know all of them for the male reproductive. Now we're going to start the female reproductive system. So for the female reproductive system, gonads are ovaries that they are producing oocytes, and also they are secreting some hormones. Then we have, as the duct, we have uterine tube or fallopian tube, or sometimes we call them oviduct, oviduct, because it is transporting the ovum inside of that. When the ovum comes out of the ovary, gets into the uterine tube to reach the uterus. Then after that we have uterus, that it has different parts that we're going to talk about. That the end part of that is called cervix, and uterus is the place that when the oocyte is released from the ovary, it comes here, and somewhere in the middle of the way in the uterine tube or uterus, it meets the sperm and makes the zygote, right? And the zygote, when it forms, just implanted inside the wall of the uterus and starts dividing to make the embryo. Then we have vagina as another part of the female reproductive system. That's the entrance toward the uterus, right? Entrance for the sperm toward the uterus. And the external genitalia that is located in the perineal area includes labia minora, labia majora, and also we have the breast that is part of the female reproductive system, so that it can nourish the infant and newborn when it is born, right? So here you're looking at the external and internal part of the female reproductive system. You see that you have a uterus here. If you pay attention, this is the anterior side. You have pubic symphysis here, as we discussed in the urinary system. You have the urinary bladder right behind the pubic symphysis, and urethra is attached to that, right? Now you see that the uterus is located on the top of the urinary bladder and on the back of that, right? And we have different part of uterus that we're going to talk about that. This final part of that is called cervix. As you see, it is opening into this canal that we call it vagina. And vagina opens toward the outside. Then the other parts that you see here, you see the uterine tube or fallopian tube. and at the end of that you see the ovary is nearby, and its ovary is hanging here between the uterus and the pelvic wall over it. So these are the part of the reproductive system, and also you see from the external genitalia you have different parts, like here you have the labia majora, labia minora, and other parts that we are going briefly talk about that, not complete. So here you see the same section in the from the cadaver, that you see that here again from the anterior side you have the first thing that you have urinary bladder. As you see, it's smaller than the male, as we discussed before. Then after that you have the uterus here, that it moves toward the anterior. Here the fundus of that is toward the anterior. Then you have the cervix here that opens into the vagina, and behind that you have the rectum. Now we have several ligaments that are supporting these all organs: ovaries, uterine tube, and uterus. The first one that we have, that is a vast ligament that we call it broad ligament. So broad ligament encloses ovaries, uterine tube, and uterus. So in general, broad ligament is a double layer of the peritoneum, right? Peritoneum that is covering around the wall or lining inside the wall of the abdominal and pelvic cavity, right? It comes around the anterior wall and goes back and covers every organ that it has on the middle of the way and goes back, right? Covers again like other organs of the inside of the body that you see. It goes and covers around the organ, looks back behind that and covers the other side. And in this way, in the side of the uterus, like some parts of the uterus is not completely intraperitoneal, uterus is covered on some parts with the peritoneum. But as peritoneum is covering some parts of that and goes back behind it, on the side, it makes a double layer of the peritoneum that we call it broad ligament. Now, as the uterine tube is connected to the two sides of the uterus, as when the peritoneum comes and covers the around the uterus and goes back down, then it covers over the uterine tube too. And when it gets over there, gets toward the uterine tube, goes around the uterine tube, and then goes back and continue its way down, right? Uterine tube is called sulcus. That's a name for the uterine tube. And when we have a double layer that is attached to that double layer of the peritoneum, you remember we have a general term for that for mesentery, and we call them meso. So we call the double layer of the peritoneum that is connecting the sulcus or uterine tube to the rest of the peritoneum is called mesosulcus. I will show you the picture. And then also when it gets to the ovary, we have the same things. We have a double layer that connects the ovary to the rest of the layers of the peritoneum. We call that mesovarium. This has been mesoovarium. We combine them, mesovarium. And that one supports the ovary. Now, broad ligament is continuous with peritoneum and subdivides the pelvic cavity. It makes two pouches around the uterus. One is between the rectum and uterus. We call it recto-uterine pouch. One, it is between the urinary bladder and uterus. We call the urinary bladder as a vesicle, so we call it vesico-uterine pouch, because urinary bladder is simply can be resembled as a sac or bag, right? So we call it vesicle. So that one is vesico-uterine pouch between the uterus and urinary bladder on the anterior, recto-uterine on the posterior of the uterus. Now, ovarian ligament Round ligaments, suspensory ligament, and uterosacral ligaments also support the ovaries and uterus, and we're going to discuss them as we reach. So here in this picture, you see the parts of the uterus and the connection of the uterine. So this is the uterus here, then you see the connection of the uterine tube all the way here, then you see the ovary that is connected to the uterus on the medial side and also connected to the pelvic wall on the lateral side. So the things that you can see here, you see the broad ligament, that's a double layer in this side. It comes and covers the wall of the part of the anterior, it is on the posterior view. Posterior of the uterus, then it goes back and goes all the way down here, and on the way it goes over there, covers the uterine tube, and it goes back here. So this part that is connecting the uterine tube to the breast is called mesosalpinx. And then when it gets the ovary and it attaches ovary to the broad ligament, that part is called mesovario. They have a section here like this one that you see here, and looking from the side, so make it much more clear. Then the rest is all broad ligament. The one that you see, one ligament connects the ovary toward the uterus, that one is called ovarian ligament. The other ligament is attaching to the ovary, but it attaches ovary to the pelvic wall. That one is called suspensory ligament, right? Besides this one, from the corner on the other side, corner of the uterus, from here, these both sides, we have another ligament. We call it round ligament. That goes, I will show you the picture that where it's going. It goes toward the anterior wall of the abdominal cavity. We're talking about that one. And also you see here you see the uterosacral ligament that is attaching between the sacrum and uterus, these lower parts of the uterus, and attaches that to the sacrum to keep that in the position. Here also you see when you're looking from the above to the, this is the cadaver that you see, this is the anterior wall, and this is the uterus after the urinary bladder that you have here behind the pubic symphysis, and that one is the part that you have the rectum here, right? So you see the uterus here, this is the top of the uterus, we call it fundus of the uterus. Then you see the uterine tube on both sides, and then we have the ovaries here, right? The things that we wanted to see here, you see the ligaments here, this is uterus, uterine tube and ovary. Then you see the ligaments of the ovary, this is ovarian ligament, that is the suspensory ligament. Then you have the uterosacral ligament, that's from the lower parts of the uterus attaches to the sacrum. And then other things that you have a round ligament that from this corner of the uterus goes toward the anterior wall, that we call it round ligament of the uterus. So then you have a cardinal ligament that is located under the broad ligament here toward the side. So that was general parts of the reproductive system in the female. Now let's go and talk about each one of them one by one, starting from the gonads, that are ovaries that have an important job, that they produce oocytes and also produces hormones. So ovaries, they are flattened oval structures that measuring about 5 cm long, 2.5 cm wide, and 8 mm thick. So as you see, the usual size is about 2 inches. And it is important because if the ovary gets much bigger, it might be something wrong with that. It might be a cancer or something that are producing more cells, or might be a cyst or something. And this is one of the part of the examination, gynecologic exam that they do whenever the female goes for a physical, that's one thing that they examine the size of the ovary to one thing that they can decide that everything is fine or not. Especially after menopause, that is supposed that the ovaries become more silent or less active, therefore it is normal for their size to get shrink. So if it is not smaller and on the other hand it's getting bigger and bigger, it means that it might be a cancer according to the age that after the menopause, right? So that's one thing regarding the size. Now, as we talked, this is stabilized by the mesothelium that I'm going to show you. And besides that, we have ovarian ligament that connects it to the uterus, and suspensory ligament that connects that to the pelvic wall. And and also we have contains that ovarian artery and vein that are coming toward the ovary and connects to ovary at the ovarian hilum. These two, ovarian artery and vein, they get toward the ovary at the ovarian hilum. Hilum again is a location that the vessels getting and reaching the organ. So here you're looking at the ovarian artery and vein. You remember that we call these ones in general gonadal arteries and vein or gonadal vessels. And these are the ones that come in near at the level of the kidney and go all the way down here. And when it gets to the ovary, they get into the ovary here. So if we go to the next picture, should be not here, this one. So we'll get to that to see what do we have on these sides of the ovary toward the anterior side, right? So ovaries consist of two stromal layers. So they have two layers. The outer layer is called cortex, the inner layer is called medulla, right? The cortex are covered by the germinal epithelium of simple cuboidal cells. When we say germinal epithelium, means that these are the cells that are germinating, means that they are producing more and more cells, right? And these are simple cuboidal cells that surrounds the fibrous tunicle albuginum. Tunicle albuginum, the same way that around the testes you have a fibrous layer of tunicle albuginum. Here also we have a fibrous layer that we call the tunicle albuginum, and under that you have the first layer of the epithelium, that those are the germinal and they are the ones that are active and they are able to produce more cells. And all the gamete production that we're going to talk about all happens in the cortex, right? We're going to talk about that we have some cells, we have some ovocytes around them, we have some layers of the cells that together they are called follicle. We're going to talk about the developments of all those follicles and all those things, and pay attention that all of them happening in the cortex of the ovaries. And also pay attention that cortex and medulla both are part of the stroma of the ovaries, right? Means we call them parenchyma, or the main cells that are doing the functions of the kidney. Functions of the ovary. So here this is a sagittal view, as you had it in this picture here. So you're looking at this section, right? Now you see the uterine tube here with the lumen inside and is covered with the peritoneum outside, right? So this is a broad ligament that comes and cover around the uterine tube that we call it sulcus, and this part that is connect, this double layer that goes toward the uterine tube that connects that one to the rest of the broad ligament is called mesosulcus. Now when it gets close to the ovary, goes toward the ovary, covers all around the ovary and gets back and connects to the broad ligament again. This part behind the ovary toward the anterior is called mesovaria, right? And the rest of that is broad ligament. So this picture is making that very clear, the parts of the broad ligament that are going toward each of these organs, uterine tube and ovary, and they are connecting with them. Now looking at the section of the ovary, you see that you have tunica albuginea outside here, and then under that you have all those stroma of the cortex here that shows the different stages that of development of the follicle. We're going to talk about all these follicles and everything in detail. So don't be worried about it now. You will hear follicle and follicle for the whole chapter. So that was just the gross anatomy. Now let's talk about the ovocytes, the gametes that we have, that they are produced inside of the ovary. So we have three processes that are occurring in the female reproductive system. First one is oogenesis. Again, you need the genesis means production. So oogenesis comes from the oocytes, means that the production of the female gametes that they are, sorry about that they are oocytes. So the production of the oocytes is called oogenesis. The same way that you had spermatogenesis, that was the production of sperm, right? So that's one process out there. The other one, we have the changes that is happening in the ovary. And those changes in the female, we have a monthly cycle. We have monthly series of events that are occurring in ovaries. We call them ovarian cycle. And the development of the ovarian follicles happens during the specific times of the cycle. So it is not like the male, as we discussed, after puberty. It starts, when it starts, it continues non-stop the whole times, every single minute or seconds, right? But here is not like that. In the female, we have cycles. Not all days of the cycle are the same. We have different events in that monthly period. So sometimes some specific hormones goes up or down. Some changes happens during the follicle, that we're going to talk about all those ones. But as you see, we have a cycle. At one point start, at one point finish, and the next cycle starts. The same way, following to the changes that we have in the ovary, following the changes of the hormone of the ovary and everything, we have some changes in the uterus that cause the uterine cycle. And those monthly series of the events occurring in the uterus, we call it uterine cycle, and these ones preparing uterus for implantation of fertilized embryo. And that's the main purpose of having all these things, right? We need the oocytes to be produced to have a gamete available. But then this gamete combines with the gametes that comes from the male, that is a sperm, and they combine and make a zygote. Now they need a place so that they can get the nutrition, enough nutrition, and they continue dividing, developing, and all those ones to make the embryo and finally get the fetus, and they continue for 9 months. And that place is the uterus, right? And all these happening monthly things that we see, this is to provide that a proper environment inside of the uterus so that the zygote can get into that we call it implantation of the fertilized zygote, right? So the ovarian cycle and oogenesis. Let's talk about the oogenesis first. Oogenesis is the production of the female gamete, right? Now, you will see that we have many similarities between oogenesis and spermatogenesis, but on the other hand, we may have some differences. We specifically have some differences that you need to know. So again here, it starts with the stem cells, that here we call it ovogonium. Each one ovogonia more than 2, right? 2 or more. And these ovogonia, those are stem cells, they are starting dividing and they are producing primary oocyte. Then primary oocytes become secondary oocytes. Then we're going to talk about all the details about this one, which one is haploid, which one is diploid, and all those ones. Now the ovarian cycle, so far is almost the same as the spermatogenesis. We have a stem cells and it produces primary oocytes divides and makes the secondary oocytes, right? The ovarian cycle is the maturation of the ovarian follicles. So that's the main purpose of having the ovarian cycle, to have a mature ovarian follicle. And these ones are containing and supporting developing oocytes inside of the follicle. So simply, follicle, ovarian follicle, the follicles that we have inside of the ovary, they have a zygote, they have an oocyte in the middle of them, and some layers of the cells covering around them. It might be only one layer, or later, as they are developing more, it might become much more layers, right? So all these things together, the oocyte inside and all the cells surrounding that, they're called the follicles, right? So that's the definition of the ovarian follicles, that they are developing and getting mature under the influence of the hormones, right? That we're going to talk about. Now, these two processes are interconnected and occur simultaneously. So, the maturations of the oocytes that is inside and the maturations of the cells around them, that they're making the follicle all together, these happening together at the same time, that we're going to talk about in detail. Now, for oogenesis, the primary oocytes, after oogonia, we have primary oocytes, then primary oocytes undergoes meiosis 1 to become a secondary oocytes, right? So after meiosis 1, we have secondary oocytes. Also, when we have the first meiotic division, it happens, we have a non-functional polar body, because here we have the first difference between the meiosis in male and the female. In the male, we had that when we had the primary spermatocyte, then it was making 2 secondary spermatocytes, right? But here, when we have primary spermatocyte divides, then we have 1 secondary spermatocyte, the other one does not receive, the other cell that is produced does not receive much of the cytoplasm, therefore it is not remaining viable and at one point will die. That one is called polar body. So it will never end up be able to fertilize anything, right? So that one, it goes away and dies, right? So we have 1 secondary spermatocyte and 1 polar body. Then follicular fluid accumulates in the tertiary follicle. We're talking about all these follicles in detail. Creates fluid-filled antrum. So whenever inside of the cells that we have around the oocytes, we will see that a space is forming that is filled with the fluid, then we call that follicle as a tertiary follicle. And then that space is called also an antrum. So the space is called antrum, and whenever we see the antrum, we can say that that follicle is a tertiary follicle. The antrum is surrounded by a mass of cells that we call it granulosal cells, and also theca cells or theca endocrine cells. So these are the cells that are around the antrum, around that cavity, right? Fluid-filled cavity. And a layer of a granulosa cells that we call that layer corona radiata is one single layer of the granulosa cells that are surrounding the secondary oocytes. This is important because when the oocytes get released from the follicle, because in the middle of the cycle we have that oocytes get released out of the follicle when follicle gets completely mature, then in the middle of the cycle it releases the oocytes, and that's the one that we call it ovulation. And that's the one that releases the oocytes from the ovary, and then it gets into the uterine tube to continue its life, right? At that time, this layer of the cells, corona radiata, is still covering around the secondary oocytes, right? Now let's go talk about all those ones in this picture that make much more sense and you can remember them better. So here you have ovogonium that, again, as you remember, they're going under mitosis, right? So when they go under mitosis, some of them stay there as stem cells, and then some of them are getting prepared to go and make the oocytes. The ones that are getting ready to make the oocytes, the first one is called primary oocyte. And this is still, as you remember, when ovogonium goes under mitotic division, it makes two identical daughters, that those are identical to the parents. So both of them are still diploid, or we call them 2N, and they are both 64 chromosomes, right? Did I say 64? Sorry, 46 chromosome. 46 chromosome, right? So then this primary oocyte enters meiosis 1, right? The first meiosis. Then here DNA replicates and then makes a sister chromatid. Now these primary oocytes that have done some changes compared to this one then goes under meiosis 1, and then resulting is one secondary oocyte that now it has 23 chromosomes, but each chromosome has its own sister chromatid too, as you see. And the other cells that has 23 chromosomes, but there is no cytoplasm around. We call that polar body. This is the first polar body that is formed. This polar body cannot continue and be viable, and at one point will be atrophied and will die. But sometimes it happens that this polar body goes under the second meiosis division, and it may make two other polar body out of itself, but still both of them will die. So it doesn't matter that the polar bodies become two here and they die here, or they die here. Finally, all will die, right? Now, this secondary oocyte that has been formed, this is a haploid. So secondary oocyte is haploid, the same way that the secondary spermatocyte was haploid, right? Now, this one they get on this secondary oocyte goes under meiosis 2, and under that one, those sister chromatid get separated. So one of them goes into a cell that now we call it mature oocyte or ovum, right? And then the other one makes the second polar body that one will die too, right? So as you see, so again from here, secondary oocyte you have haploid, and the mature ovum is, or ovum simply, is haploid too. But the primary oocyte is diploid. The other thing that, as we discussed, you pay attention that from each primary oocyte we have only one ovum or mature oocyte is producing compared to the spermatogenesis, that from each primary spermatocyte you had 4 complete spermatid, and following that 4 complete sperm was formed. So these are the similarity and differences between the male and female gamete production, right? Now, to make it complete, you will see that oogenesis is not this straightforward. We have, in this process, we have in some steps, we have some pauses. It is not going that it continues from the beginning, boom, goes to the end. No. In some steps of the process, we have pauses. In the meiosis 1, we have one pause. In the meiosis 2, we have another pause that we're going to talk about. Now, primary oocyte is diploid, as we discussed, has total 46 chromosomes, 23 pair of homologous chromosomes, one from each parent, right? That's the definition of the homologous chromosome. Like, for example, for the hair color, you have one chromosome, one gene inside one chromosome of the mother, the other one on the other chromosome, on the other homologous chromosome from the father, right? These two together make a pair of the chromosome, but the numbers are total 46 ones. Now, secondary oocyte is haploid. Each secondary oocyte has one chromosome from each pair of the homologous chromosome, total of 23 single chromosome, although each chromosome still has 2 sister chromatids. Then, in the second meiosis, those sister chromatids are getting separated. If fertilization occurs, a second polar body is formed, and the fertilized secondary oocyte finishes meiosis 2 and is then called a mature ovum. As you see, so we talked about that the secondary oocyte, it divides and then makes a mature ovum. Now you'll see here that it is not happening inside of the ovary. The final part of this one is happening after fertilization, and we're going to talk about it. So this slide is a very good slide that you can see many events next to each other. The first good thing about this slide is just divides the timing of the life cycle in the female, that you have a fetal period from the beginning that the zygote has been formed and all the way until it becomes a complete baby and now is going to born, right? In the fetal period until birth. Then you have a childhood, that it starts from the birth all the way to the puberty, and after that you have the puberty to the end, right? Puberty to menopause. Because after menopause you do not have these ovarian cycles. They start declining, and finally they go away, right? So as you see in the fetal period, you have the ovogoniums inside of the ovaries, that they are diploid. We write it as 2N because we have the you have the 23 pairs of the chromosome, right? Then they go under mitosis, they make the primary oocytes, and then after primary oocyte, primary oocytes all enter into the first meiosis in the fetal period, right? In the embryonic and fetal period. Now, meiosis 1 is in progress. You remember this, the 4 phases of meiosis or mitosis, right? Both of them, they have 4 phases. Prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, right? So we have meiosis 1, we have prophase 1, metaphase 1, anaphase 1, telophase 1, right? Now, these primary oocytes, they entered meiosis 1 and they are in prophase 1. When the baby is born, what will happen? Are they going to continue that and finish it? Not now. They all remain in prophase 1. The baby is born with primary oocytes that they are in prophase 1. What happens during the childhood till puberty? It might be at 9 years old puberty, it might be 11 years old, it might be 16 years old. It depends on the person and it depends on the geography and many other things, right? In the cold condition, warm condition, and all those things may affect the time of the puberty, right? But whenever puberty happens, then due to the effect of some hormones, these dormant primary oocytes gets awake and continue the first meiosis. Is like a sleeping beauty, right? It becomes awake and then continue and finishes the first meiosis. From prophase 1 goes to the metaphase 1, anaphase 1, telophase 1. Then the first meiosis is finished. What is the result? The result is that primary oocytes makes a secondary oocytes, right? One secondary oocyte, one polar body. Polar body, as we said, it may atrophy here, or even if divided finally, these resulting two polar bodies will atrophy too, right? But what about the secondary oocyte? Secondary oocytes, now it goes into the second meiosis, right? Again, you have prophase 2, metaphase 2, anaphase 2, and telophase 2, right? It gets into the prophase 2, continues to the metaphase 2. Again, it goes to sleep. Again, you have a pause here. What will happen? It is waiting for a sperm to come and kiss it, right? It's like a sleeping beauty, a real sleeping beauty this time. And then that one can continue. Meiosis 2 come from the metaphase 2 to anaphase 2, telophase 2, and become a mature oocyte. When the sperm can penetrate into that secondary oocyte, right? So pay attention. This secondary oocyte in the metaphase 2 is the one that is released from the ovary. It is not a mature oocyte yet. It is not a complete oocyte or ovum yet, but that is the one that is released from the ovary. Then from the ovary goes into the fallopian tube and continue its way toward the uterus, right? Now, whenever it meets the sperm and the sperm can get into the ovary and they combine, then secondary oocytes continue the meiosis 2, goes to the from metaphase 2, goes to the anaphase, telophase, and finishes meiosis 2 and becomes complete oocytes that we call it an ovum, and one other polar body is formed that one atrophies too. So this ovum, now the chromosomes of this ovum, 23 complete chromosomes that they have finished all the divisions. Now it's ready to these chromosomes combine with the chromosomes of the sperm and they are making a zygote, right? So that's regarding the phases that we have in the maturations of the oocytes from the beginning, when they're happening and how they're happening and which pauses do we have and where they happen, right? All these ones. So that was regarding the oocyte. Now, around the oocytes, we have some layers of the cells that all together they're making a follicle that have been shown here too. That's the good thing about this picture, that have all these things at one place. So as we see in the fetal period before birth, each primary oocyte is covered with one single layer of the epithelial cell around that. We will see the bigger picture later. We call that one that you have a primary oocyte with one single layer of the cell around as primordial follicle. So as you see, before birth, the only type of follicle that we have, it is primordial follicle. And as you can say, we can expect that's very small, right? Then it remains as that during the whole fetal period, and it remains the same in the childhood too. After birth, all the way to the puberty, we have only primordial follicle. Then, after puberty, under the influence of the hormones, FSH, follicular stimulating hormone, what does it say? It says this hormone is stimulating the follicles to grow, right? So, under influence of the FSH, that is starting, the secretion of FSH starts after puberty under control of the hypothalamus. The changes that is happening starts with puberty, and the resultant is the secretion of the FSH from the pituitary, right? Now this FSH common affects the follicle. Which follicles? Primordial follicle. The primordial follicle becomes primary follicle, right? So now these primary follicles, they have these primary ovocytes, but still is in prophase 1, right? Until it continues under the influence when it becomes puberty, they continue their meiosis 1 to complete it, and then they enter into the second meiosis, but you remember they stop in the metaphase 2. That's the one that we call it secondary oocytes, and now some cells around them has changed, more layers of the cells, we call it secondary follicle, right? So pay attention that you have an oocyte in this side, and you have some cells around that besides the oocytes that inside make the follicle. So we have primary follicle, then is changing and make more cell around, and at the same time the oocyte is doing its own side part, right? And it has a secondary oocytes inside of a secondary follicle, right? Then it continue, get more mature, all those ones make a mature follicle. The other name for the mature follicle is Graafian follicle, as you have it here. And here you see that you have a cavity, a fluid-filled cavity that we call it antrum, and that is the one that when you see the big cavity here, you can see that this is a mature follicle. And you see the oocyte here, the secondary oocyte here now, that it is in the metaphase 2, and around that you have one layer of the cell, corona radiata. Now when this one completely gets mature, then it releases the oocyte, secondary oocyte in metaphase 2 with the corona radiata around that one, right? And then you see that the rest of the follicle remains inside of the ovary, that we're going to talk about what happens to the rest of the cells of the ovary that they were around the oocytes. So as you see here, you see what is happening to the oocyte from the ovogonium all the way to the ovum, and what is happening to the cells that are around. And we're going over more detail, but just pay attention that these cells are the source of the hormones that are produced from the ovum. Right? Now here to see the better pictures of the follicles. Here you see the primordial follicles. That's the ones that you had in the ovary during the whole fetal period and during the whole childhood till puberty. You see that you have a oocyte that is a primary oocyte in prophase 1, that is a diploid, right? You have one single layer of the cells around them, follicular cells. Therefore, you can say that this is a primordial follicle. And you see that some of the cells of the stroma of the ovary, for example, from this cortical cells that are around the follicle, you remember that all these changes of the follicles happens inside of the cortex of the ovary. So we call those cells as stromal cells here. And you have some collagen fiber, and you see around the epithelium you have the basement membrane and all those things. So this is the type of the follicle, primordial follicle, that we have till puberty. On the other thing I wanted to mention, that it may remain till puberty or till menopause. How? Getting back to this picture, the other difference between the male and female is that not all these primordial follicles after puberty become primary oocyte and then continue get to the mature follicle. After puberty, we have monthly cycles, and at the beginning of each cycle, only a few of the primordial follicles get and makes the primary follicle, and only a few of them continue, and only one of them becomes mature follicle. The rest of them remains there for the next month, a few more. For the next month, a few others. For the next month, a few others. So it happens that some of them remains to the end and it's not used, right? Like for example, we have about millions of primordial follicles, and by the end of the life, a number of them is used, right? Some of them die and go away, like about 400,000, something like that, remain viable, but a number of them is used. In each month, in each cycle, a few of them is used. That's other difference between the male and female, right? So for that reason, to the end of the life, there might be some primordial follicles that haven't been used and never get mature. So this primordial follicle, that's the reason that might remain the same in the cortex of the ovary till menopause. And the ovarian cycle and oogenesis. Prior to puberty, as we said, primary oocyte located in primordial ovarian follicle. Within the cortex, primordial follicle consists of one single layer of the squamous cells. At the time of puberty, follicle-stimulating hormone FSH from the pituitary gland initiates the ovarian cycle. And pay attention that the release of the FSH is under control of the hypothalamus. And as you know, hypothalamus by itself is a center for the emotion and many other things. So one factor that affects the start of the puberty can be simply some emotional and many other factors here, right? That they are releasing GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, if you remember from the endocrine part that we discussed, and that one is coming and starting secreting of the FSH and LH. So after primordial follicle, then after puberty, we have primary follicle. As you see in primary follicle, the oocytes is primary oocytes. Then we said that it's going to start and continue and finish the first meiosis. And you see that one single layer of the cells that you had over there, now you have several layers, but still you have a basement membrane around, and beyond that you have stromal cells. In the stromal cells, as you see, some changes is happening and they are making petechial cells, and now these cells that you have around the oocyte is called granulosal cells. Now at the beginning of each period, only a few of the follicles becomes primary follicle, and these changes are happening today. Now, stimulation by the FSH causes the primordial ovarian follicle to develop into the primary ovarian follicle, that as I just shown you, that makes the granulosal cells. And the primordial follicle cells divide to create multiple layers of the cells that we call them granulosal cells, that they surround the primary oocyte that is now continuing the meiosis 1, and these cells surround the zona pellucida, which is created by the oocytes. So I will show you the zona pellucida. And adjacent stromal cells become thecal endocrine cells which surround the granulosa cells. Granulosa cell and thecal cells both releasing the estrogen. And this is the estrogen that is produced by the ovary. So as you see, the source of the hormone, that's the follicles. That's why we need the follicle, because these are the source of the hormone of the estrogen, and many of the effects of the hormone as the sex hormones of the female, that is the estrogen, are these. One of the sex hormones, this is estrogen, is from the follicular cells, and that is the reason that after menopause that we do not have monthly cycles and the follicles are not getting mature. What will happen to the source of the hormone, to the source of estrogen? We are losing that. We do not have estrogen from the ovary when there is no follicle, right? So pay attention to that one. And the dominant estrogen is estradiol. So pay attention that the estradiol is the dominant estrogen that we have. The same way that we said that, for example, we have androgen for the male, and the main androgen is testosterone. So here we have estradiol, right? So estrogen functions, the functions that we have, the same way that we said that the testosterone function is just beyond the sex hormones. It has some metabolic effects over the whole body. The same is here too. It has several functions, estrogens. It stimulates bone and muscle growth, again. Maintains female secondary sex characteristics, like the appearance that after puberty happens, and by that you can differentiate a girl, a little child girl, from an adolescent or mature female, right? Affects sex-related behaviors and rights that are under control of the estrogen. Maintains function of reproductive glands and organs. Like, for example, the breast is getting bigger, or the uterus is getting bigger, and all those ones. And initiate repair and growth of uterine lining, right? That is the all the lining of the uterus that we're going to talk about, that this layer of the uterus, inside lining of the uterus, they are following the changes in the level of the estrogens. And that is the one that is called the menstrual period, and we're going to talk about. So those were all the functions of the estrogen, right? Now the other things that is happening in the ovarian cycle and oogenesis, although many primordial follicles become primary follicles, only a few of them finish their maturation and become a mature. They go mature further, and finally at the end we have usually only one single complete mature follicle. So the primary ovarian follicle developed to form secondary ovarian follicle. The primary oocytes continue to grow larger. So still the primary oocytes continue to finish first meiosis, and as soon as it finishes, it goes into the second meiosis. Secondary follicle enlarge greatly due to fluid production by the follicular cells. So here you see that you have the oocyte here. We have primary oocyte still, that is a diploid, and because it hasn't finished the first meiosis, right? Then you see granulosa cells now, as the layers are increasing, you have a cavity is produced by the fluids that comes from all these cells. They go in one space and makes this antrum, right? This antrum still is small. When it becomes big and completely covers around the oocytes, then that becomes that is called at that time as the time that is a mature follicle. But at the beginning, you can see that in the secondary follicle too, and that's how you recognize the secondary follicle. a small antrum, it is formed. That's the one that is different between this one and the primary oocyte that you had several layers of the granulosa. So the other things that I like to show you here is that around the oocytes you have one layer that we call it zona pellucida, and around that one you have one single layer that remains that we call it corona radiata, right? So this is the secondary oocytes, and the secondary follicle, sorry, that was the secondary follicle, and then the secondary follicle becomes tertiary follicle or mature follicle or Graafian follicle. So you have three names for the mature follicle: tertiary, mature, or Graafian follicle. Or sometimes it's called vesicular follicle. That is the one that you see here. You see the oocytes, but now it is secondary oocyte, means that it is haploid. It has finished the first meiosis, has started the second meiosis, and now it has a pause in the metaphase 2, right? It remains in this phase until the ovulation, until it gets out of the ovary. As you see, it has the zona pellucida around here, and around that you have one layer of the, it has one layer of the granulosa cells that all together is called corona radiata. Now that, and you see it has a big antrum all around. So you still see the granulosa cells, and also you see the thecal cells. And now you see that the thecal cells make the two layers, thecal externa and thecal interna, just to be checked. Now here you see all four of the phases. You have primordial, you have primary, you have secondary, and you have tertiary follicles. You can compare them next to each other, right? Now you know all the follicles, the changes that are happening inside of the ovaries. Let's stop here. I don't want the video to become too long and it makes it difficult to upload. So we'll continue the changes that is happening to the follicles that cause the ovulation. That when the one single follicle becomes mature, what causes that it ruptures and releases the oocytes, secondary oocytes in the metaphase 2, right? All right, stay tuned. See you soon.